Welcome to Et Al., a podcast from Baylor University Press, where we interview authors and publishing experts to bring you the best scholarship in the fields of scriptural, historical, and theological studies, as well as the world of academic publishing. Thanks for joining us.
Welcome, everyone, to Et Al., a podcast of Baylor University Press. I'm your host, Joshua Mobley, and I'm joined today by Philip Rolnick. We are very pleased to have Philip with us today. He is the professor of theology and chair of the Science and Theology Network at the University of St. Thomas in Minnesota. He is the author of currently 2 books with Baylor Press, but he has 2 more on the way. So the first one that he published with us is Origins, God, Evolution, and the Question of the Cosmos. And the second book, which we will talk about a little bit today, is actually the first book in a trilogy. So we're right in the middle of a trilogy that he has produced and is producing. And this second book is A Post-Christendom Faith, The Long Battle for the Human Soul. So this is book 1 of a 3-part that he is doing for us, and he is currently about to publish the second volume of this, which is A Post-Christendom Faith, Tradition Awakening. So we're very happy to have you with us today, Professor Rolnick. Thank you for being here.
Thank you.
So talk to us about, Tradition Awakening is the second volume in this trilogy, and the first volume, The Long Battle for the Human Soul, which is also available from BUP. Can you take us into this first volume? So what was The Long Battle for the Human Soul about, and then how does Tradition Awakening continue that project?
Well, the short way of putting it is, how did we get in the mess? And volume 1 is how we got in the mess. Now, it's not completely a narrative of decline, because throughout I make it very clear as I answer each of the alternatives to Christ that have been proposed, that the church has never gone away. That's a theme, a counter theme. There's 2 themes in volume 1, a descent into darkness, and the counter theme of how the church has never gone away. We've answered it every time, every way. But it's helpful for people if they just understand the battle that we're in. We're still in the battle for the human soul. And that's the purpose there. I'll say just a little bit more about it. It begins in the first chapter with 3 great breakages. And those 3 great breakages are the Reformation, the Enlightenment, and the French Revolution. The Reformation is an intramural fight. It's about faith, and it's about church, and it's about people who should love each other more than we did at that time, in that period. So it's not a polemic against Catholic or Protestant. There's enough sin to go around, really. But it's a description more than a complaint about this one or that one, because what it shows is that breakage made possible the second breakage, which was not about faith, which was the Enlightenment, which, if anything, was an alternative to faith, or a critique of faith. So what did the Enlightenment do? Well, Kant called it the age of criticism. And what was the first book criticized? That would be the Bible. And what was the first institution? That would be the church, and so forth. So it really, Kant was genteel and Kant was respectful, but many people were not. And so the Enlightenment opens things up in this kind of criticize everything, and let's see what stands. Descartes, in a sense, is perfect for this. He says, well, we begin in doubt. Now, Descartes' no skeptic. He begins in doubt so that he can end in certainty.
Yeah.
But those who came after Descartes just skipped the certainty and just stayed with the doubt and the criticism. And so the entire age of the second breakage, the Enlightenment, really makes possible the third great breakage, which was the French Revolution. So it really became an anti-Christian movement
Mm.
as it got underway. And then famously, of course, it devolved into the terror.
Mm-hmm.
You have the first mass murder in the Western civilization, the French Revolution. The picture of the French Revolution that most Americans have is just it's not accurate.
Yeah.
It's about death, destruction, and it's about what it means to be human. It's a vision of humanity. And it's a vision of humanity that became increasingly totalitarian and increasingly opposed to the church.
Yeah. Yeah. And so in The Long Battle for the Human Soul, you're kind of narrating this process of enormous changes that happen from early modernity to post-modernity. And you take these three kind of hinge points as you talk about them, right? These three moments where everything kind of changes. And in a sense, what you're arguing then is that our contemporary world is kind of a product of these changes, right?
Yeah, that's a good reading, Josh. And the that's the point, is that how did we get here? How did things get this way? Well, these three great breakages, which all started with a vision of something good. Nobody was trying to mess everything up. But by the end of these three great breakages, well, say the end of the French Revolution, the 19th century becomes that's where what I call the descent into darkness takes place, where you have four basic movements in the kind of obliterated landscape that's torched of the West. Uh, the English Enlightenment was very different than the French. That needs to be said. You know, you had people like John Wesley who were doing great things and great things for people. So it just was there wasn't the kind of revolutionary fervor and hatred that grew up in France. But in the 19th century, in this kind of torched landscape, first thing you have romanticism come in, and romanticism isn't like I'm in love with her and she's in love with me. It's not that kind of there was some of that in this, but this was about an egoism. It's the celebration of the self without limits, and you particularly see that in Goethe's Faust. But you see it in a lot of the artwork, and even in from Beethoven's Third Symphony, it's breaking out of all limits and all restraints. And now at the same time, it has to be said, you also have, about the same time Faust is making its appearance, you also have Jane Austen's work, which is all about limits, and which is still very much in church, in uh, the Sense and Sensibility includes the church. She never ever goes outside of that. So, and interestingly enough, Austen's work is the one that has stood the test of time so wonderfully. It's easy to depict what's wrong. It's very hard to depict what's right. That's great artistry, and she did it.
Yeah.
So, so you have this romanticism, but you also have, for the first time, you also have public atheism with Ludwig Feuerbach. So Feuerbach says basically that everybody should think God. They should think God. They should think about God, but they should think God because that's the only time you really think, because it takes you to the very top of what your humanity could be. But, said Feuerbach, you should not think that God exists. You should think about the essence of God, because that's really about what humanity is. You see, it's this battle for the human soul. This is what humanity is apart from God.
Yeah.
But you should not think that God exists. So it's public atheism. This catches on fire. Friedrich Engels and Karl Marx said that they got everything spiritual. They got their entire big picture came from Feuerbach, and they were just working out the political and social details. So Marxism is directly related to this burst of public atheism. There were inclinations, there were hints and intimations of it during the Enlightenment, but now it's just out in the open.
Yeah.
So the battle's on. And you also have the uh, the strange phenomenon of nihilism, that nothing matters.
Yeah.
It's just all, this is all just part of some meaningless evolutionary process. So now this is the descent into darkness that the 19th century experienced. And then in that century, early in the century, you have Auguste Comte, the great French thinker, who came up. He actually he was the great force behind positivism. He invented the word sociology, which he also called social physics, because he thought you could study human interactions just the same way you can study the way physical things interact.
Yeah.
And then he came up with this idea of he called it the religion of humanity. But in the religion of humanity, the supreme being is humanity. So once again, there's the battle, you see, for the soul. Because skip Christ and all that stuff. He said that's just part of the childhood of humanity. He said, we're grown up now. And so what we need to do, we need to stop thinking about some fictional origin. We need to stop thinking about a final end, like a heavenly life or something.
Yeah.
Just focus on the life we have. And that's the sense of positivism. Be positive. Let's do something positive within this very limited framework. So he wanted to do something. And his solution was, well, it was overtly anti-Christ, anti-church, anti-transcendence. There's no transcendence. So focus on ourselves.
Right.
And then Nietzsche comes along just a few years later in the 19th century, and he says, Kant's crazy. Kant's a wuss. Kant doesn't matter. Religion of humanity, never mind. He says, let's do Übermensch. Let's be the Overman, the Superman. Let's be strong, and let's not help the weak. Let's help them be destroyed. So much so that the English blamed the onset of World War I on Nietzsche. He's famously thought to have affected the Nazis in World War II, which he did, because they gave 150,000 copies of his book, Thus Spoke Zarathustra,
Yeah.
for their troops as the war began, which is about being dominating, being an Übermensch meaning over others. It's a hatred of normality.
Yeah.
Now, I need to say I love normality. I love normal things, because I think that the beauty of Christianity is that the transcendent God comes into normal things, like normal friendship, normal romance between men and women, families, children, schools, into this immanence. This is the place of Christian spirituality. It's not like floating on a cloud. It's really in the kind of intense interactions we do in an advanced civilization. But the book ends with a positive look to the future, because all of the volume 2 in this trilogy is the medicine for modernity. It's the, having told a tale of woe, it's my duty to try to offer a solution.
Yeah. And that's one of the really intriguing things about this second volume, is that coming off of this first volume, where, as you say, you've got these breakages, you have the rise of public atheism, nihilism, and this real sense of kind of darkness descending. But then your proposed solution has something to do with tradition, which, might catch some people off guard. Like, we're going to fix everything. How are we going to do it? Well, what we need is an account of tradition. So how is tradition the solution to these severe breakages that we've experienced in modernity?
Well, thanks for that question. It gets right to the point of things, Josh. It's the notion of celebrating tradition is utterly counterintuitive to the current zeitgeist. I think it's exactly what we need. Now, everybody isn't going to accept it, but those who don't are going to continue wandering in the bleak landscape that we inherited over the last 400 or 500 years. So the idea of tradition is that the Latin trado, it's a handing over. So it's intergenerational. It says that we're taking the wisdom of fathers, mothers, ministers, priests, and handing it over to the new generation. When we hand it over, we're not uh, we're not enslaving them in the old. We're giving it to them. They become. We teach them, we train them, but they become the leaders. We can't keep doing it. We just get old and ride off into the sunset. But
Yeah.
there's this handing over. Well, what happens if you don't hand it over? Well, you just go back to square one. You go back to being privative, savage, barbaric. And certainly there's some of that going on. I use Michael Polanyi's, the great mid 20th century chemist who turned philosopher, and he came up with this notion. He loved tradition. He saw it's absolutely essential for first of all, for science. You can't restart again in every generation. You have to receive what the elders know.
Right.
So this is what Polanyi called dwelling in and breaking out. So it's a way that it shows the freshness of a tradition. You're not just establishing some stodgy arthritic thing that just be more like a museum. The tradition has to be living, and the way it lives is from one generation to the next. What gets handed over? Let's just take Christianity for by way of example. What gets handed over in Christianity? Some people are going to emphasize some of what they've received. Some of them are going to de-emphasize things they've received, and they'll find new things to write about. They'll write new music. They'll build new buildings. So this is the breaking out phase. And every great scientific discovery is a breaking out. You're given what the community already understands. You dwell in that. If you don't do that, you're nowhere. And this is in a sense now the heart of the argument for book 2, which is you got to do this. And this is what a tradition does. This is the power. This is the beauty. And to argue against that, I mean, it's no argument at all. It's just kind of insane. But we are dealing with insanity writ large in the battle for the human soul.
I really appreciate what you're saying, because part of what you're suggesting here, before we even get into Christian tradition, is that, and goes back to Michael Polanyi, is that all knowledge is traditioned in some way, and that you can't, as you said, you can't start at nothing every time. And so even the least, if you're thinking of kind of maybe a kind of militant atheism alive in the publishing world of recent stock, that is coming out of still a tradition and leaning heavily on all forms of knowledge that are being handed down intergenerationally. And so it isn't just Christian tradition, or it isn't just conservative tradition or something like that. But actually all knowledge is traditioned and is passed down. And if you just wrote that off, then we would have nothing left to stand on at all. Or we would be starting over at zero every time, which is just going to get us nowhere, right? So there is a place where I suppose all of us are taking a lot on faith at any given point, right? Where we're taking on faith the word of people who've gone before us, that something has been established and has been tested and is tried and true. So what about then specifically the Christian tradition is being brought to the table in this book? What does the Christian tradition have to offer in this world that has been kind of fragmented and torn apart?
Well, a great deal, of course, but there's a great deal of ignorance about the tradition. That's one thing. So first of all, anybody who's involved in church, if you're a parishioner, if you're a pastor, priest, you have a very high sacred obligation to not to do anything, first of all, that offends or hurts. And that has not been there hasn't been a perfect track record on that. It's been quite imperfect. However, any institution that lasts for 20 centuries, and the church is the longest living tradition, I think, on the planet. It's any that survives over 20 centuries is going to have scars and bruises. It's going to have records of regrettable behavior, wrong behavior, even sinful behavior. It's just not possible to have 20 centuries of perfect humanity. That's heavenly talk. That's not earthly talk. So if you have an institution that has done pretty well for 20 centuries, you say, hey, that's pretty good. We'll take that.
Yeah.
And look at what it has accomplished. It has accomplished a kind of democratization of faith, where all people are children of God, all people are sons and daughters uh, of God, brothers and sisters to each other. That just asks for, political fair treatment, political rights, political democracy. All those great democratic movements that came up, they really their roots, their feet, standing in this Christian vision. It's not just the aristocracy. It's not just the best and brightest. It's for all of us.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then look at hospitals. The growth of medicine in the 4th century. The Cappadocian fathers they actually set up massive hospital facilities for medical treatment. They had the best doctors, and they had nursing care. This kind of innovation, this is what I meant when I said that there's a kind of an ignorance about what the church is, what the church has done.
Yeah.
If you read the entire history, if you really understood the basic teaching of the church, and not what just some mediocre leader might have said about it.
Yeah.
You would, and then you had a critique, it would be more credible.
So you've already mentioned this phrase, dwelling in and breaking out. And can you talk us through that process in a little more detail? How does one dwell in and then break out of tradition, specifically thinking in terms of Christian tradition? And then are there figures that you can point us to historically who model this really well?
Sure. So when you dwell in, as we all do, you begin in trust. You have to trust parents. So we say, well, what if the parents are bad? Well, then you're going to have a real problem in your life if they're really bad. And I've seen some of that. It's horrific. That's, again, parents have a sacred obligation. It's a lot of times it's an officium. It's an office, not in the sense of like a building, a room in a building, but a sacred duty.
Yeah. It's a
And
vocation, right?
Yeah. Parents have to do that well, and none of us will do it perfectly. All of us have critiques or things we think our folks might have done better for us. And this is part of the dwelling in and breaking out process. But you have to dwell in. You don't just dwell in a physical structure. You dwell in thought structures, faith structures, commitments.
Yeah.
These are all parts of tradition that have to be handed on.
Yeah.
Or the young just won't know it. Polanyi used this great example of the Stradivarius family in northern Italy, and they were master violin makers. And they produced these just tremendous instruments, beautiful instruments. Problem is that they died out. And for some reason, their children or they didn't have children, or as generation after many generations of this, they stopped producing Stradivarius violins. So now, the greatest violinists in the world typically have one that's worth millions.
Yeah.
It has to be insured, and the greatest orchestras might have one for their first chair and that sort of thing. But we've been struggling to rebuild violins that are as good as the Stradivarius for a long, long time. Now, that's an example of what happens when tradition doesn't get passed on.
Yeah.
But it's true in almost everything. If there's not that early training, that passing on, the child isn't ready as he
Mm.
enters into adulthood to do adult things. If he does dwell in
Yeah.
a reasonably good family, a reasonably good school, a reasonably good civilization, doesn't have to be heavenly, it just has to be really good. It's like a launching pad.
Mm.
Because each one that people have ways of seeing things differently, and that's part of the creative beauty of what happens in this never-ending process.
Yeah. Yeah. And you speak frequently about the family, and you have a whole chapter devoted to the family. And I think, for anyone who's ever read a theology of tradition or something like that, that might be a surprising chapter title, especially as the book is coming to a climax, because, you're expecting development of doctrine and these kinds of ideas are going to be percolating in a book about tradition. But you really kind of drive it towards this question about the family. And so I wonder if you could talk a little bit about why is the family such a central role in the traditioning process?
Well, the family is a tradition, and the family also transmits tradition. That's the first place. In fact, the family has been called for many decades now by the beautiful name, the domestic church. It's a place of learning. It's a place where children first get told what matters, what's important. Why is it important not to say bad things to that other kid at school? But we need fathers and mothers. Children who have them are so much healthier by every measurement. And I'm not a big social science guy, but I read a lot of social science for that chapter, and every measurement says the same thing: happier, healthier, uh, more directed, have a sense of purpose in life. And if fathers and mothers both are devoted to Christ, and they take children to church, and they talk about faith at home over the dinner table and so forth, the statistical probability of the children being part of churches is amazingly high. It's 95% or more in some cases.
Yeah.
And on the other side, on the downside, if one or both parents don't go, or especially if there's a divorce, oh my, if there's a divorce, it almost doesn't matter at that point. The statistical probability just plunges down for what the faith of the new generation will be.
Yeah.
So it in both its positive and its negative cases, the family exemplifies tradition. It is tradition. It teaches so much in so many different ways. So, and if a family that is loving, where parents love each other, and it's clear that they love each other to the children, and where the children are taught restraint and love. This is a beautiful phenomenon. We've all seen beautiful families. Some of us have been blessed to be part of it, and these are launching pads for the future.
Yeah.
You asked me a moment ago, and you mentioned the development of doctrine, and that conjures up John Henry Newman. So he is one 19th century example of how seeing how doctrine or teaching, how the church's teaching evolves over time and needed to evolve over time. Even in the 4th century, Gregory Nazianzen says, well, in the Old Testament, it's mostly about God the Father. In the New Testament, it's almost all about the Son. But in early church, it's about the Holy Spirit, the coming of the Holy Spirit. The Holy Spirit is still with us and guiding us. So he said that he was talking about a development of doctrine in the 4th century. So many of the great figures know that it's not an extreme breaking out. That's an important tradition between the Christian tradition and the scientific tradition. They're analogous in many, many ways. They overlap in many ways. But in science, you could have a great big breaking out where you have a whole new way of looking at biology or something like this.
Yeah.
Just don't do biology the way you used to. And I had a biologist once tell me that he just doesn't read Darwin anymore because almost all of Darwin's ideas are passé now. Another great example of dwelling in, breaking out. But now these guys have gone farther in their genetic studies and so forth. But we would never say, as Christians, that, well, it doesn't matter what Paul said, or it doesn't matter what Augustine said, or it doesn't matter what Luther said. We care a great deal because, in some sense, humanity is the same in every generation.
Absolutely. And so you're talking about this dwelling in and breaking out and taking tradition seriously across time. And that is premised on a kind of a trust. You talk about the child and their parents and learning. So there's a base level of trust that then develops the capacity to break out and develop in new ways. But you also, after your chapter on the family, you turn to a chapter on those who would claim to be spiritual but not religious. And it it would seem like that moniker or that self-identification for you would be it would be outside of the boundaries of a healthy dwelling in and breaking out, because maybe there's an insufficient amount of dwelling in or trust or something like that. So talk to us about spiritual but not religious and how that would be different from the kind of traditioned approach to life that you're talking about.
Another great question, Josh. Well, first, it's a big and growing phenomenon. I think it's primarily related to something that happened that really starts in the Enlightenment, the age of criticism. And this is, again, where volume 1 and volume 2, in some ways, are linked. Well, what does the age of criticism teach me? Well, it teaches me not to trust. It teaches me to start by criticizing. But secondly, if we take another point from Kant, Kant introduced the term autonomy, from auto meaning self, and nomos meaning law. So where is the law? Is it laid out in the patterns of creation? No, I give myself the law, as opposed to heteronomy, somebody other giving me the law, whether it's a person, a doctor, a government official, or a church official, or the Bible. Anything that's hetero is other. Heteronomos, the other law. So autonomy is the key, I think, to understanding spiritual but not religious. Who's in charge? I am. I think it's an extension of autonomy, but it lacks something that Kant still retained, which was universal responsibility. Kant wanted people to be autonomous so that they could be universally responsible. It's the point of his categorical imperative.
Right.
But what we have now are a lot of people who are they're very good. All they do, they don't trust. They criticize. They're suspicious. This doesn't help them. It's bad for them. It's bad for their thinking. It's bad for their soul. It's bad for their developmental learning. If I distrust everything that you say, I'm not going to learn much from you. And some of it, some things are arbitrary. Why drive on the left instead of the right, or why drive on the right instead of the left? But once they're established, we can't all just drive on whatever side of the road we please. And spiritual but not religious really arrogates all of the decision-making about faith to oneself. Now, there's a certain amount of that happens no matter whether we're part of a faith of a church, and a traditional church, or not.
Yeah.
People still have to take it in for themselves. If a church was made up of a bunch of people who really didn't understand what was being said, what was being taught, and who really didn't care, who really didn't agree with it, well, that isn't going to last very long. So you have to take it in for yourself. So the spiritual but not religious is not entirely wrong. That really needs to be said. There's something true in what these folks are on about. But again, the problem of ignorance looms large. Very few of them, I think, could pass a simple quiz on what Christianity does and doesn't teach, or about Christian history. Now, the other problem with spiritual but not religious, it's the very title. If I tell you I'm spiritual, I've just committed a catch-22 in Christian faith. Because if I claim to be spiritual, I'm not spiritual. Spirituality, real spirituality, authentic spirituality requires humility. And if I say, well, I'm spiritual, I'm not like those other guys. They're just religious. So I'm making a claim about me that's positive. I'm kind of like Napoleon. I'm crowning myself. And I'm also making a critique about all those other guys, a dismissive, sweeping critique that can be done in total ignorance of what they're actually doing.
Yeah.
So spiritual, religious. Well, and the very name religious, religion comes from religio, being tied together, bound together. Well, that's what love does. It binds us together. Love binds us to other people. Christian faith is not just about me and God. It's about me and you. It's about me and everyone.
Yeah.
So Christian faith always goes in these two directions, to God and to all others. So spiritual but not religious doesn't really seem to grasp that.
Yeah. And so, I mean, I love what you said at the end there about the love that connects God and creation, creatures to one another, and that's the ultimate point this is driving towards. And so it leads me to the question, what is the ultimate point here that you are driving towards? So we're coming toward the third book in this trilogy. And I know that you're actively finishing the book now, so it can get into the production pipeline here. So tell us, where are we going from here? If we've seen this kind of where we've come from and some of the descent into darkness, the good and the bad that came from all of those things, but then into this need for tradition, this kind of clarion call for being people who dwell in and break out, who are trusting in the tradition we've received. What comes next?
Well, volume 3 is called Theology in the Wilderness. It's almost a point, a takeoff on Bonhoeffer's point that we become marginalized, where we've been thrust out of the center of the city. We're on the outskirts now. Everybody is not going to come to faith. Everybody should come to faith, but everybody won't. Well, I know that. I recognize that. But if I can say just about volume 2, as it leans on to and into volume 3, tradition awakening is a double entendre, in the sense that a double meaning. It's about, we wake up ourselves. First of all, that you are in a very serious battle. And it doesn't end because you want it to end. The other guys have a say in it too. The battle for the soul is ongoing, and tradition is the front line. The health or sickness, relative health, relative sickness of our traditions is going to tell how well we do. So the first part of the double entendre, we wake up we're being awakened. The second part is, we awaken anybody who will listen to us. So, for instance, I'm going back to volume 2, if I may. Two of the chapters on the church are called, well, the section is called Enclaves and Outposts. So the church is an enclave in which a community, in which character is promoted, in which love is promoted, in which commitment is promoted, understanding, growth, even a vision of excellence, of virtue, is all promoted within the church enclave. What's the rest of the civilization doing? Oh my gosh, crazy stuff. It's a strangeness, and just a kind of a civilization-wide melee. It's like a free-for-all, is what Charles Taylor called it. It's not like this against this. It's like there's all kinds of fights going on because there's nothing at the center. So the enclave provides a center. where I'm not the center. And this, by the way, is another problem with spiritual but not religious. I'm not the center. And I learned that in the enclave. That's the invaluable thing. I learned that God is the center. The fellowship of all people is the center. I'm part of it. I participate in it, but I'm not the center of it. That's very healthy for me and for all people. But the second part is the outpost part of the church, which is it's a short chapter on evangelism, where Jesus really is the first evangelist.
Yeah.
And we're just continuing his work, as the great Baptist theologian Jonathan Wilson put it. We're just carrying on what he began.
Yeah.
So as our outposts, we're trying to promote a civilization of love. It's not our main concern. What we're trying to do is bring people to Christ, bring Christ to people. And that is both a question of having good ideas, persuasive ideas that are superior to all the alternatives, which they are. But it's also a matter of being the kind of people to whom others will be attractive. Back to love again, Josh. If we got great ideas, but we're kind of obnoxious, it's not going to work.
Right.
Yeah. I mean, there really needs to be a respect for the people we disagree with. So that's part of the enclaves and outposts. That's my vision for that. But book 3, Theology in the Wilderness, is my attempt to just share various aspects. It's not systematic, but it's really about the human person. What does it mean to be a human person? Because it turns out that the Christian notion of the person underlies every significant thing we talk about and do. There's not a single Christian teaching where if you pull off the cover, underneath it is a vision of what the human person is.
All right. Well, that sounds very exciting, and it is an excellent way to wrap it up, because if you're beginning with the 3 breakages and you talk about the French Revolution in particular as a question of the human person, and then to rehabilitate tradition in volume 2, and then to return to that question in volume 3 of what is the human person and how are we to understand ourselves in light of these things, seems like an excellent way to wrap up this 3-volume project that you've got. So Professor Rolnick, it has been a real pleasure talking to you today. We're very excited about your new book coming out soon. It is available for pre-order now at baylorpress.com, so make sure to look that up. Professor Rolnick, thank you for being here.
And thank you, Josh, and my thanks to all the people at Baylor. It's a pleasure for me to work with really is a great team at Baylor. It's a team of people who are efficient, but who are also just decent folk.
Well, we really appreciate that, and we love working with decent folk as well. So you've been a pleasure to work with, and we look forward to continuing to do so. Thank you, Professor Rolnick.
Thank you.
All right.
Thank you for listening to Et Al., a podcast from Baylor University Press. We hope you've enjoyed today's episode. Make sure to like, comment, and subscribe to keep up with the latest from Et Al.